Hi there. Welcome to the December 2024 book club. Today, we're going to be talking about the book, The Self Driven Child. The authors of this book are doctors Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. Bill Stixrud is a neuropsychologist. So he does those long testing assessments where you find out what a child's IQ is, what their strengths and weaknesses are, whether they have a learning disability. So he does a lot of diagnosing and advising on how to help kids play to their strengths. Ned Johnson is an educator of many years who does a lot of test prep coaching, including for some very high achieving but anxious kids. So the two of them together have decades of experience working with young people, and they have really great ideas about how to guide us as parents in how we should be with our kids. So let me share my screen, and hopefully now you're all seeing this slide where we're seeing the name of the book and the authors. For those of you who haven't yet joined the Facebook group for this book summary club, it's called the Empowered Parents Club. If you have a Facebook account, just search for the Empowered Parents Club, ask to join, use the same email that you use to sign up for the book club, and I'll add you to the group. We always put the live, well, I try. Sometimes there's technological difficulties, but we always put the live book club summaries in here on the third Wednesday of the month at noon. So you can either watch them live or watch the replays here. It's a good resource to not have to be digging through your email to find the old book clubs. In addition, when you get on there, see here where it says media tab, that is where we keep all of the actionable PDFs that I create for each book. So you'll find all of those resources in one spot. Similarly, if you want to, you can download the Parent Doctor app on the Apple App Store. This also has all of the book club replays and actionable PDFs. If you haven't already, please vote for the 2025 books for our 2025 book club. And if you enter and vote, you will be entered to win one of 12 free books that I'm giving away starting Christmas Eve. All right, so this is the first slide, and it's related to ideas that pop up throughout the book. And I really like visual ideas. So the idea here is that regardless of whether we're talking about a new child learning how to walk or if we're talking about learning a new language, every human being is on their own timeline when it comes from getting from point A to point B. And depending on what the goal is, like maybe the goal is to be able to do a back handspring on a balance beam, I'm going to be like B double prime here because I'm probably never going to get that to happen. But Simone Biles is more like on B. So we're all on our own timeline. And when it comes to individual goals, some of us are going to be B prime for certain goals. And that doesn't mean that we have less value than another person. Same for our children. They may be B prime in certain areas and they may be B in other areas. And for the kids for whom academics and schoolwork is the B prime, it really is tough to be a child in our society. So if you have a kid who has a learning disability, if you have a kid who has ADHD, if you have a kid with cognitive impairment, then we as parents really have to support them and identify the places where they are on a higher slope trajectory for their talents and play to their strengths. And that's what this book and the authors really talk about over and over again.
I don't know if your kids do an instrument, but for example, I understand at school they're practicing spelling, they're writing, they're doing math, but an instrument, you have a lesson once a week and then you're supposed to practice. Like
Mhm.
how on the kid's case should you be? Because it feels like I'm nagging my kid constantly and he doesn't want to do it. And I don't know, do I just drop it? If I drop it, no practice is going to happen. I just don't know what
Yeah.
the right balance is, or maybe we should just quit. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So I think I side where the authors come out on this. And Bill also talks about how the main author, his parents let him quit piano when he was in like third grade. And he was thankful that they did. He didn't then play an instrument until the Beatles became a big thing when he was in high school. And then he got, or no, maybe he actually, yeah, so he really wanted to play the accordion. Don't ask why, but he wanted to play the accordion. His parents said, "We have a piano. So if you really express interest in attending your piano lessons, then after a year, we'll get you an accordion," because it was like an investment and everything. But they wanted to see that he was really committed. And he wasn't. So he gave up and he never got the accordion. But then when the Beatles became a thing, he actually got really interested in music. And in high school, He started playing guitar, he got in a band, and he still plays in a band to this day. So he was thankful for his parents to not basically ruin his love of music by forcing him to do it when he didn't like it and giving him the time and space to reach that B prime when he was ready to then embrace it for himself. Now, there's pros and cons, right? And then they give examples like we can do this also with sports, but we should recognize ultimately for music in particular, they say they have no doubt that music is really valuable. It's good for brain development, it's good for so many things, but you don't have to play an instrument in order to have music be a beautiful part of your life as an adult. Many highly functional adults don't play an instrument or read music, so it's not really necessary. So you have to ask like why is it that I'm pushing this on my child if it's my interest more than it's theirs and be aware. And so they say that you should have a collaborative decision-making process even with a young child and outline. I think that whatever, piano, violin, whatever, music is important for these reasons. And maybe I enjoyed it for these reasons. But I'm hearing that you don't really want to go to practice. You don't want to go to the lessons. You don't want to practice on your own. So I'm going to let you, and I'll give you the exact quote on this in a minute, but I'm going to let you make your own choice here and think about what would plan B be. Like if you decide to quit, like how will you fulfill these needs in your future? Music is a little tricky with that one, but essentially, oh shoot, I don't have all my notes on this one. I made extra notes, but I lost them. Well, we'll get to it. But does that answer your question? I think they would basically say to have a conversation with your child about it, even if it's a young child, outline your point of view about why you think it's important that they continue with their lessons, but also notice without judgment that they don't seem that interested in practicing and recognize that they won't get better if they don't put in the effort. So, how do they think they should handle it from here? What do they want to do? Do they want to keep taking the lessons without practicing? Do they want to start practicing more? Do they want to stop? And they also say you can also say, let's stop for 3 months and then decide after that point in time whether you miss it and you want to go back or you're happy or not doing it and giving them the space to make that decision too. So that's their take on it, which is very much not the Tiger Mom, battle hymn of the Tiger Mom like approach, which is, but again, that's it's also accepting that you may not have a future superstellar athlete or superstellar musician on your hands, and that's okay. That you love your child even though they may not be amazing at some skill, which is it's a tough pill to swallow if you have strong, ambitious desires for your child. And I think all of us have that to some extent, whether we want to admit it or not. We all would love to have a kid who really excels at something. And that's not a bad thing to have within us. But at the end of the day, what's more important is that our kids know that we love them, even if they're not like the best at everything or anything, that we just love them for who they are. And I think that it's very easy, especially for the Hermione type kids, especially at our kids' school, to feel that their ability to be loved, that their approval from us and from other adults is dependent on their success in certain domains rather than just dependent on being the good person that they are. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it was helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So, let's go back to slides here. Okay. Again, whose problem is it? So, trying to recognize when you're having a conflict with your kids, when you're feeling frustrated that they're not doing something, asking yourself, like, is this my problem or is this my kid's problem? If they're not doing their homework, is that your problem or your kid's problem? It's their problem. And you have to really let them own that, feel that, and then make a decision on how they want to handle it. And we really want to foster curiosity and self directed learning because that's what's going to help them most in the long run. The same with music, right? Like, he's going to get the most out of music lessons when he's really passionate about it. Every child would. And okay, this next part is overlying a lot of what's in the book. Have you guys ever seen or heard of this Yerkes-Dawson curve before? It's a long name, but basically this was based on psychologists' research and it's been replicated over the last 5 decades many times. The idea is that there's an optimal stress for performance. If we're really not stressed, we don't care, we're not going to perform at our best. But similarly, if we're too stressed, we are not going to perform at our best. So there's this sweet spot where we're like nervous about it, excited. That's what's going to motivate us to be the most prepared and to perform the best. Now, within this, though, there are some things that we should keep in mind. And that is, in general, not always, but in general, girls have a curve that is shifted this way. And they talk about discussing, again, this is Ned Johnson, the educational therapist, talking to middle schoolers about a term paper that was due and noticing that they'd all been given like 2 weeks to do this term paper. And the Friday before it was due on the Monday, he talked to all the girls, and most of them were like, yeah, I'm done. I just have to work on the footnotes, or I'm done. I edited it once, but I'm going to go back and edit it one more time. But they basically had wrapped it up by Friday before it was due. The boys, on the other hand, when he asked them, how are you doing? They were like, oh, yeah, I have an idea, but they hadn't started it yet. And so they still had like enough time. They had 3 days, but they were not getting it done ahead of time. They were not planning their time. Why? Because their optimum performance is better under the deadline. So when I was talking before about my friend's son, Henry, who's an adolescent boy, like he is here because he needs that little bit of adrenaline rush to be motivated to get it done. So when he told his mom, yeah, I did it, it's not that he was lying with the intention of deception. He just knew he would be motivated to do it and he would get it done at a different time. And he did, but it was just annoying to her that he wasn't honest with her because it felt like he was lying. So along with this, I think this is so fascinating. In 2014, there was a study published in the journal Science, and it was one of the groups was college students. And they gave these young people 6 to 15 minutes alone in a room with nothing there, no stimulation, no phone, no other person, no music, no internet. And then they had this machine that they told them, like, oh, don't touch that because if you do, it might give you like a mild electric shock. And 64% of the young men shocked themselves rather than being bored or lonely in this room. And only 15% of the young women shocked themselves, which I think if we come back here, like, in order to feel good, the men needed a little bit more stress. And some of the women too. So it's not all women, right? But some of us just are really uncomfortable and would rather be stressed a little bit than just at peace. And this relates to something called the default mode network. Have any of you heard this term before? This is something relatively new in the neurosciences. It was first published about 20 years ago based on imaging studies in the late 1980s when they reviewed them. But basically, it's a network of neurons that's pretty diffuse within the brain, parts of the brain that get more active and parts that get less active when we are idle. So this may be when we're just like those kids sitting alone in a room with nothing to do. It may be when we're intentionally idle, like when we're meditating, or when we're unintentionally idle, like ruminating on something. But essentially, this is a network of neurons that is active anytime we are not driven by external stimuli. So when we're alone with our thoughts, when we're thinking about things, when we're daydreaming, when we're planning, when we're envisioning, the default mode network is activated. And it can have a tendency to be associated with negative emotional states. That's true more often in people who are depressed or anxious. But it also can be associated with positive emotional states. And that's true for people who meditate often or visualize the future in a positive way. So there's a whole chapter in the book about the value of meditation. And we read another book this year called Raising Good Humans that was a mom talking about how meditation has really changed her life. It's something that I've been dabbling in since the 1990s. I'm actually going to get really serious about it this year. I'm going on a 4-day silent retreat in February. I still haven't yet implemented any kind of meditation practice with my kids. And I'm curious if any of you all have done that and if you have any experience with that.
I was just talking to my husband yesterday about saying that our son maybe needs this, but he likes to meditate. I tried it probably 15 years ago and I didn't feel like it was doing anything for me, but we were thinking maybe to try like a guided app or something, maybe just, to start because he wouldn't really know what to do and it might be
Yeah.
helpful. But I don't know
Yeah.
if you've had any apps that you like that you would recommend or anything.
We
So
use
there's-
Headspace.
Yeah, Headspace is the one that's probably been researched the most as well. And they talk about that one in the book. The app Calm has a bunch of meditations. With my meditation now, I'm not using any apps. I just do both open-eyed meditation and silent closed-eye meditation, but without guidance. But if you're just starting out, I think having someone to guide you is very useful because, again, that default mode network for many of us, when we just try to sit quietly, goes to an anxious and neurotic place that can be uncomfortable. But with training, and actually this is what I discovered, gosh, now it's so long ago. In residency, UCLA has a mindfulness awareness center. And I took 3 semesters of mindfulness courses. What I remember most when I was a resident doing these mindfulness meditation classes was that what I noticed was how many self-critical and like crappy thoughts I had when I let my default mode network turn on. And I just realized like, oh, no wonder I'm like stressed out because the minute I like just let myself go to a quiet place, my mind is filled with this chatter that's really not positive or relaxing. If anything, it's the opposite. It makes me feel bad and stressed and bad about myself. So that awareness really helped me a lot actually, because I was able with practice to change that and to turn it off. And now I've learned new skills to really be able to visualize positive things, which helps immensely. And on the days that I do those types of visualizations, I notice my mood is better. I feel more gratitude. My fuse is longer in terms of patience because all of that kind of goes together. So I haven't yet figured out a great way to do this with my kids, but I am planning on really working on that next year. And I hope that I can be able to share some tips and tricks with you guys through the newsletter and other things. But I think it's remarkable that in this book, Bill's been meditating for 40 years. He talks about actually getting hooked up with some neurologists to an EEG, and he's been meditating so much that within a moment of them telling him, like, okay, go ahead and meditate, they were like, wow, like you just had this big, like, you can see alpha waves, which are a different frequency of brain waves when you're in a meditative state. There's like your alpha waves are just like crazy. And so he's like, yeah, I've been doing transcendental meditation for 40 years. He's like, yeah, I can really tell. And what Bill, the author, talks about is that he sees a lot of patients every day, and then at the end of the day, he has to take his charts and put them to a storage area and finish his notes. And he said normally this will take him like 30 minutes, but he's gotten into the routine of doing like 5 to 10 minutes of meditation and then doing that exercise. And what he finds is it takes him like 10 minutes instead of 30 because he's just much more linear. He doesn't go from here to there. He just does it one step at a time, slowly and properly. And it just makes him function better. So again, I think if we go back to these pictures, this curve, right? There's external stressors, but if you think about your own life, I'm sure you can imagine that doing two sort of stressful things or something that might be stressful would probably and probably has been for you a very different experience on one day versus another, right? Like maybe as a student when you were a kid, you had to talk in front of your class or give a public speaking thing. I remember I was able to do this once in middle school, no problem. And then I got to high school and it seemed like just a regular day. And I got up there and I was like, flushed and stammering and dry mouth and so nervous. And my teacher was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know why." But for whatever reason that day, I was way over here. So there's external factors that we can't control that contribute to our stress level on a given day, in a given moment. And then there's internal factors too, right? And in adolescence, those are all over the map because our kids' brains are really remodeling in major ways. You've got hormones. So if you have a daughter, she's going to have times in the cycle when she's shifted more over here or more over here, usually more over this way. So that a smaller stressor is going to make her perform worse. So again, like at a certain time, let's go to this picture because that makes more sense. Say your daughter normally with a little bit of stress would perform at her peak, but then at a certain time in adolescence or on a bad day, that same amount of stress might have her failing and doing things over here like I was when I was stammering and stuttering, trying to give my presentation. So keeping that in mind, I think when you do meditation, generally what you're doing is controlling what you can within your brain's default mode network to have this more often be shifted over here so that the same stress is not going to evoke the same negative performance. And it takes more stress to make you be on the downside. And it's not really a perfect bell curve like this either. I just couldn't get the graphics from Canva perfectly, but it's generally like this. All right. So, other things to keep in mind, I don't know if any of you have kids who have anxiety disorders or autism, but both of those make it such that, again, a normal stressor is going to make you perform worse because you're generally more sensitive to stress. And then on the other hand, adolescence, because our brains are hardwired during adolescence to have a lower baseline dopamine. So everything feels more boring. It takes a lot more for us to feel excited about something. But then when we do, the high, the dopamine high that you get from novelty as an adolescent is higher than it is at any other time in your life, which is why kids are like so crazy wild when they're excited about something. But it's also why they're so bored the rest of the time. And now, if you imagine if you're a boy, we saw that curve was shifted over this way, and you have ADHD and you're in adolescence, now it's really tough, right? And similarly, if you're the parent of a child who has anxiety and ADHD, it's also just such a moving target. It's hard for them and it's hard for you. And in adolescence, it's way harder. I wanted to put this up because it's just such an important thing. I've seen it so much as a child psychiatrist, kids with adolescence and ADHD and anxiety. And if you have a child like this, it's important to keep in mind like 70% of people who have ADHD also have a comorbid anxiety disorder. And that is why it is so challenging to parent a child or an adolescent who has these conditions. So, again, stress can be internal or external. And this idea of this is from John Kabat-Zinn, who was the person I read when I first got into meditation in the 90s. He is a professor, I think he's a doctor at Tufts or UMass in Worcester. And he has a whole mindfulness meditation, which is essentially transcendental meditation, Eastern meditation put into lay terms for us Americans. And his analogy is imagine you are a sailboat at sea and the external forces are like the winds and a storm might come. You don't have control over those external forces, but you do have control on the times when you decide to take down your sails and the times when you decide to open your sails. And so I think that is something we can really help our kids with through the process of understanding their bodies, their stress response, and meditation, all of which can help them be more in control of that Yerkes Dawson curve. But they're never going to be 100% in control of it. And the other thing we really have to do for them is just be supportive and let them understand that the same person might sometimes perform here and might sometimes perform down here. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that they are not valuable. It just means it was a different day, a different set of circumstances. And this is something that Ned Johnson talks a lot about because he does a lot of SAT, ACT coaching for kids. And what he finds is that when he can just reduce their stress and help them feel more confident, often their scores improve by over 100 points. And it's not the test prep and the learning, really. They had the learning. It was really just helping them shift this curve to be more in their optimal performance place. Any questions about that part? All right. So this is the part it's both good to know, but also it feels like a lot of pressure. And they acknowledge that in the book too. So essentially, because we are our kids' parents and we're very important in their lives, we are a big part of that external stress that can shift them one way or the other on the Yerkes Dawson curve. And they really encourage us to be a non anxious presence. They encourage us to be like the safe harbor. They talk about kids playing tag. And when they come and they're like, I'm on base, like I can't be tagged. That's what they should feel like when they're at home and when they're with us. And they gave examples of a lot of parents saying, yeah, but my kid, he has a basketball coach or baseball coach who's like really strict and has high expectations, more of an authoritarian style. And they really respond well to that. Like, why can't I be like that? I think my kid needs that. And they say that's fine, but only you can be your kid's safe home base. Like the coach can't be that for them. It has to be you, the parent. So because we have to be that safe home base, it's better for us to be authoritarian, loving and firm, give them the room to make their own decisions, their own mistakes, let them know that we're here for them no matter what, rather than saying it's my way or the highway. I know better. We know better. They know we know better, but they still won't get agency and control unless they have experience. And so to do that, we really have to manage our own stress because giving them that space to make their own mistakes will cause us to feel distressed. Our worry that they're screwing up their lives, that they're not going to get into the college that we would like them to, or the program we would like them to, or whatever, makes it really hard for us sometimes to sit back and extend to them the confidence that they will figure it out and trusting that they know what is best for them because they know themselves better than anyone else. And so we really want to foster self-acceptance by first accepting our kids for how they are. So they say we should emphasize to our kids, this is your work, your life, and you'll get out of it what you put in. So it's not that we're saying don't work hard. We're saying you're going to get out of your life what you put in. Work hard, make that choice. And then we should say, whose problem is it? And we should say, you're the expert on you. You have a brain in your head, and you want your life to work. And I think that's actually a really beautiful 3 things to remember. Our kids are the experts on themselves. They have brains in their heads and they want their lives to work. I've seen so many parents who get really frustrated with their kids because they're pushing their child to do something that they think is in the kid's best interest. They may not be wrong, but the harder they push, the more the child rejects that idea and will even let their grades fail, whatever will happen, their social life will go away because they just don't want to prove their parents right. And so we have to be able to just let them do it their own way. And that stepping back process can take quite a long time. I gave that example at the beginning. Some of you weren't yet on the call, but they talk about examples of parents saying, I let Johnny try to do his own homework without my help for a week and he didn't do anything. See, it's not working. And they said, no, actually, quite the contrary. It is working. He's not doing it because he hasn't yet learned, and you're going to have to wait longer. Like that process to get to B prime takes longer than we think it will. And we just have to be patient. So managing our own stress, and they talk about parental anxiety really contributing to kids' anxiety. And this is absolutely true. And encouraging parents, if you are very anxious, if this idea of letting go is really hard for you, that you should seek your own professional support, because often our own cognitive distortions drive our own anxiety. And that makes it harder for us to trust that our kids will figure things out. All right. Then they talk about empowering our kids' decision making skills. And this was actually pretty interesting. They cited a study where they asked adults, 16-year-olds and 9-year-olds, how would you handle a situation? And it was a situation where the kid was really struggling, and the adults pretty much were like, yeah, you should get this kid into psychotherapy. And the 16-year-olds all said the same thing. But over half of the 9-year-olds said the same thing. And I don't know if it was multiple choice or spontaneous answers, but the takeaway was that even really young kids can have good decision-making ability. And when they don't, it's usually because they lack the information or knowledge that they need to make that decision, not because they lack the judgment. And this stemmed from Bill Stixrud, who again is the neuropsychologist, talking to a lot of college students and being struck by the fact that kids in their 19, 20, 21 years would come, and he'd ask them, like, what year are you in college? And he said it was just remarkable that so many of them would be like, oh, I'm a junior, but I should be a senior, but my parents held me back in kindergarten. Or I should be a sophomore, but my mom held me back in first grade. And a lot of them were externalizing this blame for being older than their peers on their parents. So he started to then recommend that when parents are making this decision, which is a very important decision, and it's not necessarily the wrong decision, he encouraged parents to talk to their kindergartner and their first grader about the reason they were making the decision and asking the kid what he or she thought. And he said in starting to do that, what he noticed was you can't always predict what a kid will say. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, I don't think I'm ready for first grade. I want to do kindergarten again. Sometimes they'll say, I think I can do it. Can you get me a tutor or someone to help me so that I can catch up? And so sometimes they will present their own solution that the parents may not have thought of, like an option C. And I thought that was great because then it gives the kid autonomy. And now that kid 20 years from now isn't going to be hopefully blaming their parents anymore. They're going to feel like they had some agency in that decision and that they had some control over their life. What do you guys think about that? Because I thought that was pretty controversial, actually. If you're thinking about a kindergartner, a first grader, those kids are really young. But it made me think of my own son who, at the school they're at, they have to choose whether they're going to do Mandarin or Spanish for the remainder of lower school at the end of kindergarten. And he decided he wanted to do Mandarin. And I really didn't want to let him do that because I know nothing about Mandarin. And so I told him, okay, I explored with him, like, why do you want to do it? He gave me his reasons. And I said, I hear you. But basically I think I had read this book, but I don't know if it was really forefront in my mind. But essentially I used the principle that Bill Stixrud is saying, which is, okay, let's just think through what that will mean. Because if you do Spanish, I can help you because I speak some Spanish. If you do Mandarin, mom and dad don't know any Mandarin. You're going to be on your own. Like, we can get a tutor for you if you need one, but we will not be able to help you. So is that really what you want to do? And he thought about it and he decided, and we let him make that decision. And then he started to struggle because sadly the pandemic hit right when he was in first grade. So then doing that remote Mandarin was really hard for him. And we did end up getting him a tutor, but now he's in sixth grade. He's stuck with Mandarin. And it's still wild to me that I can see my kid is like writing and speaking Mandarin, and he's 12 and he's this white American kid. I never thought that my kid would be speaking Mandarin. So I think that often we can let our kids have more decision-making ability, and then they have more skin in the game, essentially, right? Because it's their choice. So when the going went tough and he wanted to quit, we again then talked about the options. Like, we can ask the school if you can switch to Spanish. You know, you've only been doing Mandarin for 2 years. It's not like you do it every day. But then when that came push to shove, he was like, no, I just want to stick with it, but I need more help. And so we got him more help. So I thought that's a pretty interesting idea, this idea that even really young kids can and should be involved in complex decisions when it impacts them, because it impacts them, and they should have some say in it. Have you guys had any experiences like that with your kids? Not yet. All right. Basically, the idea is acknowledge that your child is the expert on themselves. Don't assume that you're better than they do. What is best for them? Trust that they know what's best for them. Encourage their critical thinking. Get them to think about the pros and cons of a choice. Like, why would that be better for you? Don't just argue the other side, but say, okay, this is what I'm hearing. What else? And then see if they can argue the other side. Can they see the other side? Because then again, you're building their own abilities and their brain and their thought process if you get them to play devil's advocate with their own reasoning rather than you doing that for them. Develop contingency plans. I like this a lot. They talk about helping your kid say, okay, we'll let you make this choice, but let's think through what if it doesn't work out? So, for example, like, what if trying to think with your music lesson example or something else that might happen. Like, kids often will also be like halfway through a season or a commitment and then decide they want to quit. And you can decide it's okay to be more authoritarian at that point. If you've paid for the classes, you can say, okay, we paid through X date. So we have a commitment through that. You have to stay through then. And then if you decide you don't want to continue, you can. Could you let them quit sooner? I guess you could, but you also want to make sure that they understand how is that impacting not just them, but the other people they've made a commitment to, and have them have a plan B. Let them know that even if they quit now, you may not agree with it. You may be upset with that decision. And then if they decide a year from now to ask to go back to that activity, you might not want to let them because you're angry. But the better thing to do would be let them make their decision, let them know piano's always there or soccer's always going to be there if you decide you want to go back to it, and have a contingency plan that, like, if you're interested in it in the future, just let me know and we'll figure out how to figure it out. And you really want to foster their sense of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And that's how you can do that with that joint decision-making process. I don't know why I put this back here again. The whole idea, though, what they emphasize over and over is collaborative problem solving. And I think here, the reason I put this is because we can often have the vision and the foresight to know that if they stay on the path we've laid out for them, they're going to get to point B faster. And that's why they should do it. And if we let them do it their way, the cost is time, right? And maybe more effort. Like, it might be a longer, more arduous task for them to achieve the way that they want to do it. But if that's the way that they want to do it, and they're going to learn something from the process by having control and agency over it, is it so bad? You have to ask yourself, what do you lose by forcing your child to do things your way versus what do they gain by learning from the path that they've chosen? And then they talk about really nurturing intrinsic motivation. And this was key. They talk about how you can't, I took notes on this. You need control to develop competency. And I thought that's pretty profound. And it's also very true. You can't get good at anything unless you have control over practicing whatever it is yourself. Like, you can watch someone cook a complex meal a lot of times, but until you've actually prepped the vegetables and made the broth and done all the things like yourself, you will not be really good at doing that. And you probably have to do it a few times poorly before you can do it really well. And agency also takes practice. So again, when we do finally let them take over, we have to expect that they're not going to do as good a job as we would do, and know that's true, and not discourage them or criticize them, but instead let them know it's okay. It's your first try. It's only going to get better from here, so that you keep that momentum towards their B prime, whatever it is. Again, I think that's why I put this here, because as they're trying on their own, it's going to be some line further along this way, right, than this one if we were doing it for them. But it's all their heavy lift, right? It's not us holding up this line. So essentially, the slope of this line depends on effort. And if we help them with the effort too much, we really hinder their intrinsic motivation muscles from being built and getting stronger. And if we let them lift this line themselves, then they get stronger. And the next time they do it, it's going to be faster and faster. And I think that really resonated with me and made sense to me. Does that make sense to you guys? That visual? Okay. So then, yeah, so first is autonomy. First is relatedness, like respect, then is competence, and finally it's being able to do it on your own. Again, it's this idea of first we show our kids, first we do it for them, then we show them how to do it, then we let them practice doing it with our support, and then we let them do it on their own. And that's just the natural progression for everything, whether it's getting dressed on your own, to taking a shower on your own, to making your own food, to driving a car, to doing your homework. All of those things require these steps. All right. They have a whole chapter on technology use. I think we are going to talk about this next year for sure, because we're going to read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. But essentially, they're still recommending this collaborative decision-making model when it comes to technology use. This book was written quite a while ago. I want to say it was like 2020 or 2021. So we have a lot more evidence now on the dangers of smartphones, especially in like unlimited internet access for kids. But they do recommend that we really talk to them and help them come up with the ideas for how they're going to limit themselves. like, again, this like build this idea of like work first, play later. They talk about a young man with ADHD who found that he had to get his homework done right away before he got home from school or right after getting home from school so that he could play video games. He really liked to play video games, but he wasn't staying up all night playing video games. They say that even if a child has ADHD, it doesn't mean that they can't learn to self regulate. They just have to be given that opportunity and to be able to figure out what works for them. In his case, he liked to do his homework at school because that's when his stimulant was still on board and he was able to focus and get things done. If he waited to do homework much later in the evening, he took a lot longer to do his work. So again, we want to encourage the self-regulation rather than providing consequences or negative things. And we also need to model through our own awareness, our own behavior too. They talk specifically in the book about moving your body in sports. Sports are such a big thing for many families. But basically the idea is you don't have to force your kids to do any particular sport, but we should encourage our kids to move our bodies and to challenge themselves in some way. And they specifically say like yoga, martial arts, fencing, rock climbing, these might be good physical movement activities for kids because they engage both coordination and thoughtfulness, but also they're a self-driven, like you're competing against, not competing, like you're going against your own best, right? It's not necessarily that you're trying to beat this other person, although people still can approach anything with competitive nature. And then they talk a lot about specific chapters on supporting kids with learning differences, ADHD, learning disabilities, and autism spectrum, but essentially the same principles apply. It's just that instead of being like a small delta between B and B prime, it might be a much longer delta, and that's okay. But these kids need much more our confident delivery to them that they can do it and our support in helping them figure out the path that works for them and learn from what doesn't work for them because they need much more to have this muscle of their own motivation than neurotypical kids or kids who don't have learning disabilities because they have to work harder and they have to be able to do that. Their stamina has to be higher. So the key takeaways for empowering self-driven children were to empower responsibility, shift the ownership of tasks, homework, chores, etc., to kids over time gradually as they get older and more responsible. Create a calm environment and be that safe home base for them. If you have significant anxiety yourself and that's hard for you, get the support you need to be able to be that calm, safe base for them. Foster intrinsic motivation, get them to want to do whatever it is and give them the room to figure that out and then support them in any way that you can, but try not to impose too much what your wishes are for them. Just give them different opportunities to find out what appeals to them and then support what they naturally gravitate to. And balance technology use. They have that whole chapter, like I said, of regulating kids' use by talking with them about it and having collaborative decision making about it. So that's my last slide for today. Any thoughts or questions about this book? Oh, the other thing I wanted to say was I challenged my son with this today too. So when they talked about the personality type that they call Hermione type kids, these kids who are very like type A and they want to get the good grades and they work really hard. He had a daughter who was like that. And when she was in high school, he challenged her to get a C. And he said, if you get a C on your report card, I'll give you $100. And this was probably 30, 40 years ago. That was probably more money than it is today. And he said, she never took me up on the offer, but like she got the point, which was essentially he wanted her to have that exposure for herself to realize you're still going to be you. You're still going to be just as valuable, even if you have a C on your report card. But she ended up getting an A and she went to, I think she went, I don't know, I think she's like a psychologist or economist at University of Chicago anyway. So he clearly had like different kids with different strengths and he had a good approach with them to motivate them. But I told my son, who's pretty Hermione like too, I was like, if you get a C on your report card, I'll give you $100. And he was like, no, I don't want to do that. But this is the perfect time for him to do that. He's in 6th grade. Like these grades don't really matter. But he gets the point, which is essentially like the grades shouldn't matter. It's what you learn and why you're learning it that matters. And he also recommends, and I guess I'm doing this as well, they didn't look at their kids' report cards unless the child wanted to share it with them. And again, the idea that you shouldn't be valuing your child based on their grades. If they want to bring it to you and share it with you and be proud of it, then that's one thing. But if you're like looking at it, you're like, why did you get a B in this class? Which is what my parents used to do to me. Then you're really sending the message that their value to you is dependent on their performance on this test. So instead, you want to just love them for who they are and give them the opportunity to share with you their wins and then celebrate those wins with them. But also keep in mind and let them know that their value and their worth is not determined by their grades. All right. Thank you all for joining today. It's great to see you. If you can go to here, I'll put it over here. It was Book Club, Parent Doctor, Vote 2025. That's where you can vote for the books for next year. And if you enter, you have a pretty good chance of winning one of the books that we choose to present next year. And please, if you know anyone, I think the other question I had is I call it the Empowered Parent Book Club. And I think for people who don't know or haven't attended it, that sends the message that you have to have read the book, which is what most book clubs are. So I'm wondering if I should call it the Book Presentation Club or the Book Summary Club or something different so that people are not afraid to join. What do you think? Any thoughts?
That's not a bad idea, honestly, because I think people do feel like a book club is where you've read it and are going to discuss it. And it was only in like the Merman Minutes that it said you don't have to have read the book. I was like, oh, I'm really interested in learning about this. So
Yeah. I think I do need to do something because I've
I
had
think
people
that's a
text
good
me like,
sign.
I'm meaning to join, but I just don't have time to read the books. And I'm like, oh, you don't have to read the books. And that was never my intention, but I think I also just forget to say that each time I say, today's the book club. You don't have to, I forget to say, you didn't have to read the book, just come and listen. But thanks, Betsy. I think I will do that. I'll rebrand it so that people know they can join even if they haven't read the book. Because the whole intention is to save us, because we're all busy, from having to read all these books and instead just give the takeaways that are most important.
Yeah, this has been amazing. I'm really so appreciative because I literally have a stack of all of these books and haven't gotten to them, and I only get to read them on my like mommy getaway once a year.
Right.
And so
No, I'm the same.
It's awesome. I was taking notes the whole time.
Oh, good. I'll give you every book. I make a PDF. So Betsy, you'll get like an actionable PDF if you're on the list. It'll get emailed to you. It's also in the Facebook group and it's on the app as well. So all of those are there. It's not the total summary, although maybe we can put even the slides. We could do that too. But I'm like you. And what I have found is this is my job, right? So I do read most of these books. I have read a lot of parenting books. But what I have found is that by forcing myself to be accountable to all of you or whoever's going to join and make a summary about it and really think about it, I'm able to really think about this more and internalize it and understand it better. Because when you can teach something, your understanding of it just goes much higher than if you just read passively. So I've really enjoyed it as well. And I plan to continue it into the future and hope that the club will continue to grow. Because I know that a lot of parents can use this information and summaries, and there's always more parenting books coming out.
And it's helpful too because as the kids go through different phases, like it all makes sense to me now, but 3 years from now, I might be faced with something that's a little bit different than I had seen before. And to be able to remember that there was a discussion and go back and get the light sheet of it is really helpful. And even to identify which book I should be going to reread is I think it's extremely helpful.
Awesome. I'm glad that you liked it. Great to have you. Thanks for joining. All right. Bye, Dashma. Bye, Jen. Bye, Betsy. Have a great day.
Bye.
Happy holidays. See
You
you in the
too.
new year.